So today I'm going to take you through some tips for creating an effective phenomenological study. Let's get started. First and foremost, you need to identify your research problem by determining what kind of problem you want to look at in your study. Phenomenological research is primarily used to study areas where there's little prior knowledge, and it really focuses on examining human experiences through first-hand accounts given by individuals who have experienced the phenomenon. These accounts or descriptions are known as lived experiences, and in them, the participants are asked to describe their experiences with the phenomenon, how they perceive it, judge it, maybe how they feel about it. They're asked to describe it, maybe how they make sense about it, and also how they remember the experience. So when you're trying to settle on your research problem, keep in mind that the phenomenological method works best if you, as a researcher, are seeking to understand several individuals' common or shared experiences that pertain to an issue. For example, your research problem could pertain to how people deal with grief. Once you've identified your research problem, you will need to select your focus, or in other words, the phenomenon which you wish to study. Some examples of different phenomenon include the experience of learning or the notion of professional growth. As I previously mentioned, you will be exploring this phenomenon within a group of individuals who have all experienced it in the past. This is where selecting a sample population comes in. The sample size will vary depending on the size and scope of your study. Smaller studies can have as few as 5 individuals, whereas larger studies can include over 25 participants. When you are determining your sample population, you should ideally aim for a heterogeneous group of individuals, as this will provide a wider range and scope of data. In terms of participant recruitment, this can sometimes be a bit tricky for a phenomenological research study, but it all depends on the phenomenon that you are going to investigate and being able to find a group of people who all have experience with that particular phenomenon. As a researcher, you need to acknowledge your role and bracket out. You may ask, what is bracketing? Well, bracketing is leaving yourself out of the study in terms of discussing your own personal experiences with or opinions of the phenomenon being studied. It will allow you to focus on the experiences of the participants within the study and will help to avoid bias within your research. Bracketing basically allows you to achieve a fresh perspective on the phenomenon being researched while laying your own experiences and any preconceived notions that you may have to the side. And it should be completed as a means to solely focus on the participants in the study. You need to understand that this method relies heavily on interviews. So if you are not a people person, then it's probably best to consider a different research method. Phenomenological studies are primarily interview-based, with researchers conducting in-depth individual interviews with participants who have experienced the phenomenon being studied. Based on the literature, researchers should interview a minimum of 5 participants, and interviews should be conducted until the researcher is satisfied that the participant has shared all of their knowledge, experience, and feelings about the phenomenon in question. You will also need to keep in mind that each interview you conduct requires both analysis and transcription, which can be a time-consuming process. And this is just another factor to consider before embarking on this kind of a study. As I have mentioned in my video on how to conduct an effective academic interview, there are 2 rules of thumb that you should abide by: actively listening to and not interrupting your participants. Active listening will allow you to evaluate participant responses and address any areas which you think might need a more detailed answer. In terms of interrupting participants, not only is it rude, but it can also negatively impact a participant's train of thought and leave them at a loss of words for the point that they were trying to make. So if you do want to address something that your participant has spoken to, try and wait until there is a break in the discussion and then bring it up. And lastly, questions. There are certain questions which need to be posed to participants during the interview process in a phenomenological study. And there are typically 2 broad questions posed to the participants, while the rest of the questions are just probes for answering the main questions. So the 2 primary questions which you should be asking are, what have you experienced in terms of the phenomenon? And secondly, what contexts or situations have influenced your experiences of the phenomenon? Now, these questions allow for you to gather data, which will be used to create the textural and structural descriptions of experiences. And they will also provide understanding of the common experiences of the participants. So try and have your questions ready and test them on willing participants to gauge their effectiveness well before you embark on your main research study. Thanks so much for watching.